Dan, we were just having a conversation here about whether these rising yields in Europe are anything to be concerned about at this stage, particularly for countries like Italy and Greece. It's notable that the credit default swap now, the cost of owning some of this paper is back to the highest since November of 2020. How concerned do we need to be about Europe?
I think we need to be very concerned about Europe. On the one hand, the economy is very close to a recession. The risk of recession in the major economies is quite significant. On top of it, the problem of rising yields comes at a time at which some of the weakest economies in Europe have not done their homework in terms of reducing the structural deficit. For example, Spain has doubled the structural deficit. Therefore, the need to go to markets to fund the government budget is quite significant, and the estimates of deficit spending seem to be a little bit optimistic because of the macroeconomic risks. So we are facing a double risk. On the one hand, bond yields are rising. The net supply of bonds is not going to be purchased by the European Central Bank. It has been 100% of net issuances for almost at least 5-7 years. No? So the big problem is, at what cost will investors want to buy bonds from countries that are in very difficult financial and macroeconomic shape in an environment of weakening growth and rising yields, when even with the increase in yields, what we are seeing is still negative real yields? So quite complicated, I believe.
What about the debt sustainability argument, though, that the governments will make? I mean, the Spanish Treasury has told the market that effectively it only needs to refinance 15% of its paper this year. The Italians also have reasonably long duration at this stage. As long as we don't see these yields continue to travel higher for a sustained period, these countries will be okay, won't they?
Well, obviously, the actions of the treasuries in each of these countries have been the correct ones throughout the period of very low bond yields. What they have done is to extend the maturity of debt as much as possible. And that is perfect. That is absolutely the correct strategy. The problem is that that was also the strategy before the crisis of 2011. And the problem of debt crisis tends to happen not due to the refinancing of existing debt. I don't think that there is a risk in refinancing, but the cost of the newly issued debt, because the perception of risk rises. So you're absolutely right. When bond yields in the Eurozone, weaker countries in Italy and Spain and Portugal rose to extreme levels, 600, 700 basis points of risk premium. It is true that the average cost of debt was half of that, even less than half of that. But the risk for investors and the perception of solvency risks is the problem.
Dan, good morning to you. We all lived through the last crisis. Why isn't it going to be a lot worse than recession? I just say this because of what you said in your first answer about the structural deficit in Spain and other countries being pretty much double what it was at the height of the crisis. We haven't used the last decade to repair from the great financial crisis. We know that by looking at debt to GDPs. We've got to pay for an energy transition. We've got to pay for Ukraine's rebuilding at some stage as well. We've got to pay for defence now, with the Germans making a huge U-turn there as well. Who's going to pay for all this stuff? How can we explode the debt even more from stratospherically high levels that it is now?
Well, unfortunately, the solution will be to take on more debt. If you look at the European Recovery Fund, if you look at the different measures and the different proposals that the Eurozone is proposing, putting on top of the table, all of them mean more debt. And obviously, higher taxes. Those two mean lower economic growth. What we do know from the previous crisis is that the European Central Bank, which is certainly significantly behind the curve now, will continue to be massively accommodative. So unfortunately, the biggest risk of all that scenario is that if anything, what we may find ourselves living with in the European Union is with more prolonged levels of core inflation at levels that we were not thinking about even in our wildest dreams a few years ago. So it's going to be a combination of higher taxes, higher inflation, and unfortunately that will not stop an increase of debt. The Japanization of the European economy is not a risk that we should be sort of not thinking about.
Painting a grim picture there, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Daniel Lacalle with us, Chief Economist at Recession.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.